Now in our 25th year, a quarter of a century of service to the worldwide amateur radio community, we are This Week in Amateur Radio, your all-amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. This is edition number 1345 with a release and air date of Saturday, December 7th, 2024. Please take the program to your air following the cue tone.
On the air and on the internet since 1993, serving the amateur radio community with weekly, reliable, amateur radio news and special features, we are This Week in Amateur Radio, the worldwide premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1345 of This Week in Amateur Radio. SpaceX receives FCC approval for satellite-to-cell service from Starlink Generation 2 satellites. Japan launched the world's first wooden operational satellite to test timber in space. Over $41,000 is raised by donors and YouTubers for the ARRL Teachers Institute. The 2025 Youth on the Air Camp application period is now open. Get on the air in December with 160 and 10-meter contests. A free quarterly newsletter is launched by HAM-SCI. Communication support for a Connecticut road race has become a family affair. The air leak aboard the International Space Station Russian module is getting worse. The ARRL releases its 2023 annual report. The FCC proposes using 5.9 GHz for car-to-car communications. We will have the monthly volunteer monitoring report. And there is a new jolly old operator on the air in Australia. We will have the story and how you can talk to him for you in this week's report. These headline stories will come to you in a moment, along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all those amateur satellites in orbit. Australia's own Onno Benschop, Phi K6FLAB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio begins a multi-part series beginning with an episode he calls The Bald Yak, Part 1. Our own amateur radio historian, Will Rogers, K5WLR, returns with another edition of A Century of Amateur Radio. This week, we climb aboard the Wayback Machine to the beginnings of World War I, where we find the disturbance, as the amateurs called it, putting an end to amateur operations in the United States. We will stop by and visit with Bill Saliers, AJ8B in the DX Corner, with all the latest news on DXpeditions, DX, upcoming radio sport contests, and more. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air. Right now. Reporting from the winter wonderland that is our studio facility just outside windy Albany, New York, this is W2XBS.
And reporting from Dallas, where the elms and oaks are finally putting on their fall colors, I'm Tammy, KI5ODE.
And reporting this week from the News Bureau in Cortlandville, New York, where the snow is currently coming down. And just like that, we went from falling leaves and cider to falling snow and eggnog for some holiday cheer. I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
And reporting from our News Bureau in Rochester, New York, along the southern shore of Lake Ontario, after enjoying a very happy Thanksgiving, I'm Dave Wilson, WA2HOY.
And reporting from our Troy, New York News Bureau, where it may not be winter yet, but you could fool me by the temperatures, I'm Eric, KD2RJX.
And reporting from our News Bureau in Knoxville, Tennessee, where it's not only beginning to look a lot like Christmas, but it also feels a lot like Christmas, I'm Josh Marler, AA4WX.
And reporting from our ham radio outpost in the western Catskill Mountains of upstate New York, where we're making a list and we're checking it, well, more than twice. I'm Don Hulick, K2ATJ.
And reporting from our News Bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where Jack Frost has joined up with Old Man Winter, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, searching for another blanket.
With our lead story, I'm Tammy, KI5ODE. This is an update to a story from last week. As we reported, SpaceX has received permission to provide Starlink satellite service to cellular phones in the areas of the U.S. where terrestrial cellular networks do not operate. Now, the Federal Communications Commission gave its approval in late November for direct-to-cell capability, known as supplemental coverage from space, using second-generation Starlink satellites that will be launched soon. There will be as many as 7,500 of these new satellites that will be capable of providing this kind of mobile phone service. SpaceX has a lease agreement with cellular provider T-Mobile for this service in the continental U.S., Hawaii, Alaska, and Puerto Rico. Earth-to-space communication will occur on the frequency range between 1,910 and 1,915 MHz. Space-to-Earth communication will use the range between 1,990 and 1,995 MHz. The FCC order, dated November 26th, said that direct-to-cell capability is designed to provide a more robust link to emergency services when severe weather or other conditions do not make conventional connections possible. The FCC said that before Starlink can provide this service to mobile phones outside the United States, it would need permission and licenses from those countries' governments. The FCC said that various subbands between 1,429 MHz and 2,690 MHz would be used for this purpose.
A YouTube telethon to raise money for the ARRL Teachers Institute on Wireless Technology was a resounding success. Here with all the details is John Ross, KD8 IDJ, who files this special report.
More than $21,000 was contributed during the live stream, which unlocked another $20,000 that donors had set out as a challenge gift, a total of $41,000. ARRL Director of Development Kevin Beal, K8EAL, says that upped the ante. It's quite clear that even with the generosity of donors in attendance, the challenge gift really pushed everyone until the end to meet that goal. The event, hosted by YouTuber Josh Nash, KI6NAZ, was his popular ham radio crash course channel. It drew thousands of viewers. On the stream, several teachers and students who have benefited from the TI shared their stories of success. We're glad that teachers Everton Henriquez and Drew Mortensen joined us on the stream. Two of Enrique's students attended and were inspirational and impressive. That's the whole reason why we're doing this, said Beal. A face familiar to longtime ARRL members also paid a visit via video. Former ARRL President Keg Craigie, N3KN, shared her memories of the origin of the ARRL Teachers Institute on Wireless Technology, which she pioneered. People have stepped up in just the most wonderful ways over the years. Large donations, small donations, whatever people are able to do, have made it possible to continue this program, she told Beal in a video call. Craigie attributed the program's success to its flexibility and how it can evolve to meet the changing needs of educators. ARRL Education and Learning Manager Steve Goodgame, K5ATA, hopes to pivot the program again for 2025. We're taking it on the road. Historically, we've flown teachers into ARRL headquarters in Newington, Connecticut, but we want to go meet some of them where they are, said Goodgame. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
The program has lofty goals for expansion next year. In 2024, there were 7 cohorts. Next year, we'll have 16. We're grateful to everyone who participated in the live stream, whether they watched it, shared it, or donated to it, said Goodgame. They are enabling us to continue this growth.
Santa Claus will be on the amateur radio airwaves again this year. And here to tell us how you can get kids in your area to get on the air and talk to Santa is that jolly man himself, John Ross, KD8IDJ.
The 3.916 Santa Net will be on the air every night at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time from November 29th through December 24th. You can reserve a spot with Santa by making a pre-net check-in. You can check in each night starting at 6:30 p.m. Central Standard Time online at www.cqsanta.com. Santa and Mrs. Claus will also be together on the air this year thanks to a special arrangements with the Crowley, Kansas County Amateur Radio Club. They will be on the air on the 147.000 repeater and the Sunflower Net system between 10 a.m. and noon on November 30th and beginning at 10 a.m. until band conditions change on November 14th and 21st. In addition to the local repeater, the Sunflower Net offers connection options to All-Star, DMR, D-Star, Echolink, Fusion, Hamshack Hotline, M17, and P25. The club is also setting up a radio link at the local library to talk to Santa. And also for the 4th year, Santa has sent Elf Chunky and his team of amateur radio operators to northern Colorado to help make sure children of all ages can talk to Santa on station N0P from the North Pole. Thanks to the Longmont Amateur Radio Club and the Northern Colorado Amateur Radio Club, children can get into the holiday spirit by talking to Santa on the radio. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Both are ARRL-affiliated clubs. Get the details on that operation at w0eno.org/Santa. That's w0eno.org/Santa.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
A coalition of New York City and state and public safety officials and emergency response leaders are calling on Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer to ensure passage of a bipartisan AM radio for every vehicle act before the current Congress ends. Led by FDNY Commissioner Robert Tucker and NYPD Chief of Patrol John Chell, the letter to Senator Schumer was co-signed by leaders past and present and other public safety agencies. The letter reads, "For those tasked with keeping the citizens of New York safe, AM radio has and continues to play a vital role in their mission. As we reflect on the recent anniversaries of both 9/11 and Superstorm Sandy, we are reminded of just how important AM radio was to informing the citizenry during and in the days after these crises as to how the public safety would be jeopardized in future events without access to AM signal. During these events, power outages and the collapse of the Internet and cellular networks left AM radio as the sole source of real-time emergency information for millions of residents. The letter also draws attention to the removal of AM radios from new vehicle models by some automakers, a decision the authors argue poses a direct threat to public safety. FEMA has also warned that this trend could leave millions of Americans without access to critical, life-saving information during emergency. The legislation, which has strong bipartisan support, would mandate the inclusion of AM radio in new vehicle models, citing its critical role in public safety. Supporters point to recent disasters like Hurricanes Helene and Milton and the Maui wildfires, which again demonstrated AM radio's vital role in delivering emergency updates when other communication systems fail. The signatories finished by saying, "In our capacity as experts tasked with protecting the citizens of New York, we respectfully ask that you work to ensure the enactment of the AM Radio for Every Vehicle Act before the next Congress." The AM Radio for Every Vehicle Act was garnered 262 co-sponsors in the House and a supermajority of 63 in the Senate. The House Energy and Commerce Committee approved the bill with a 45-2 vote, advancing it to the full House for consideration. Should the act not pass before the 118th Congress ends early in January, it will have to restart its journey under a Republican-led legislative branch.
For the past 5 years, air has been escaping through a Russian section of the International Space Station at an increasing rate. NASA and its Russian counterpart Roscosmos are still in disagreement over the root cause of the leak as well as the severity of the consequences. While the Russian team continues to search for and seal the leaks, it does not believe catastrophic disintegration of the PRK is realistic. Bob Cabana, a former NASA astronaut who now chairs the ISS Advisory Committee, said during a meeting on Wednesday, Space News reported. NASA has expressed concerns about the structural integrity of the PRK and the possibility of a catastrophic failure. The Russians believe that continued operations are safe, but they can't prove to our satisfaction that they are, and the U.S. believes that it's not safe, but we can't prove to the Russian satisfaction that that's the case, he added. Russian teams believe the air leak was likely caused by high cyclic fatigue from microvibrations, while teams at NASA think pressure and mechanical stress, residual stress, material properties of the module, and environmental exposure are all at play, according to Space News. As the two space agencies continue to discuss the potential risk, the aging space station is inching closer to retirement within the next 6 years, and its hardware may finally be giving in to the wear and tear of the harsh space environment. The Progress 89 thrusters were fired Tuesday, November 19th, for 5 minutes, 31 seconds, to raise the orbit of the International Space Station to provide an extra margin of distance from a piece of orbital debris from a defunct Defense Meteorological satellite. The predetermined debris avoidance maneuver was conducted in coordination with NASA, Roscosmos, and the other space station partners. Without the maneuver, ballistics officials estimated that the fragment could have come within about 2.5 miles of the station.
In New Zealand, amateur radio operators are sharing the power of radio, in this case low-power license-free handhelds, to bring communities and families closer together. Helping people connect over radio and stay connected is the mission behind the effort known as Rebuild Free Radio Network. It's an emerging collective in New Zealand that's relying mainly on portable, license-free handheld PRS or private radio service radios that are often used as tools in public safety. A number of the participants also have their amateur radio licenses, including the network's national coordinator. Writing in Kwa, the newsletter of the Franklin Amateur Radio Club, club member Trish Murray, ZL1TTM, explained how, community by community, she is helping to strengthen the network locally. She described the hands-on interactive workshops she has been leading to get people familiar with the UHF radios they have purchased but may be hesitant to use. The workshops explain that local resiliency is the best reason for using a radio and the area repeaters, whether it's to stay in touch with other family members or communicate in a crisis.
ARRL, the National Association for Amateur Radio, has published its 2023 annual report, which includes a summary of the year's program activities, along with the 2023 and 2022 financial statements and an independent auditor's report. John Ross, KD8IDJ, is here with the details in this report from League headquarters.
ARRL marked 2023 as the Year of the Volunteers, recognizing the nearly 57,000 volunteers who contribute to supporting the organization and the wider amateur radio community. The future of amateur radio rests on the shoulders of volunteers, and every one of us can be a volunteer, said ARRL President Rick Roderick, K5UR, in his message in the annual report. The report highlights the involvement of volunteers across program areas, including ARRL volunteer examiners and Amateur Radio Emergency Service ARES volunteers. It seems right for an organization like ours, which is fueled by volunteers, to take a moment to recognize the countless individuals who share their time, talent, and treasure with ARRL to advance the hobby we all love, said ARRL Chief Executive Officer Dave Minster, NA2AA, in his included report. Minster also noted the celebration of the ARRL Foundation's 50 years in 2023, its work which has benefited the charitable, educational, and scientific efforts of the amateur radio community. Minster recognized the generous contributions from Amateur Radio Digital Communications, ARDC, which renewed commitments amounting to more than $2.1 million to support club grants, education programs, and scholarships. This represents the largest single commitment ever for our organization, said Minster. Also included in the annual report is ARRL's Report to America, which references the involvements of amateur radio operators during natural disasters that occurred in 2023. In addition to formal partnership agreements with served agencies, including the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, and the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC. In May of 2023, ARRL entered into an updated memorandum of agreement with FEMA to enhance cooperation between ARES and FEMA in providing disaster communication when all else fails. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
The ARRL 2023 annual report is available for download at www.arrl.org/annual-reports.
December brings two ARRL-sponsored single-band contests. The ARRL 160-meter contest began Friday, December 6th at 2200 UTC and concludes on Sunday, December the 8th at 1559 UTC. Stations in the United States, including Alaska, Hawaii, U.S. possessions, and Canada, can contact any station. Stations located overseas can only contact U.S. and Canadian stations. Contacts may be made by using the CW mode only. See the contest rules at www.arrl.org/160-meter for more information. Next weekend, the ARRL 10-meter contest begins on Saturday, December 14th at midnight UTC, Friday evening in North America, and concludes on Sunday, December 15th at 2359 UTC. Stations may contact any other station, regardless of location, using CW and phone. All stations send a signal report. Stations located in the United States and Canada, including Alaska and Hawaii, send their state and province. Mexican stations send their state. DX stations send a serial number. Contest rules are available on the ARRL website.
Now celebrating our 25th year keeping the amateur radio community around the world informed, you are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available worldwide as a podcast from our web at twiar.net.
It is time for this month's Volunteer Monitor Program report. The Volunteer Monitor Program is a joint initiative between the American Radio Relay League and the FCC to enhance compliance in the amateur radio service. This is the report issued in December 2024 for activity of the VM program. Technician class licensees in Indiana, South Carolina, and Mississippi received advisory notices regarding FT8 operation on 40 meters. Technicians have only CW privileges on 40 meters. Licensees in Alabama, Florida, Louisiana, Michigan, and New Jersey received advisory notices for excessively wide signals of 10 kHz or more. Commission Rule Part 97.307 Subpart A provides that no amateur shall occupy more bandwidth than necessary for the information rate and emission type being transmitted, in accordance with good amateur practice. A licensee in Florida received an advisory notice for deliberate interference to a DX station, and to operators trying to work the DX station, on 14.252 MHz. Such operation is in violation of Section 97.101 Subpart B of Commission Rules. The operator was cautioned that FCC fines for such operation normally start at $7,000. There was one general volunteer monitor alert. There were 2 FCC referrals regarding apparent experimental high-speed stock trading signals on amateur frequencies. The program administrator presented a program by video conference to the Wisconsin DX Club and participated in one FCC meeting. The totals for this month's monitoring were 1,475 hours on the HF frequencies, and 2,455 hours on VHF frequencies and above, for a total of 3,930. We thank Volunteer Monitor Program Administrator Riley Hollingsworth, K4ZDH, for this report.
The Amateur Radio Citizen Science Investigation Team, known as HAMSI, has begun publishing a new quarterly newsletter focusing on hams and the scientific community. The newsletter, which is delivered as a free download, contains updates on ongoing projects and any related activities. HAMSI's founder, Nathaniel Frizzell, W2NAF, expects that the new publication will enhance communication among supporters and observers. In addition to bringing readers up to date on various projects, the inaugural issue features a number of profiles of volunteers deeply involved in HAMSI's work, including data analyst Gwyn Griffiths, G3ZIL. The Whisper enthusiast has been deeply involved in various propagation studies. The newsletter download is available at hamsi.org/newsletter. You can also visit the HAMSI website at hamsi.org to add your name to the mailing list.
There has always been a fascination among radio amateurs in digital modes of communications. In thinking about where the spacecraft sits in electronic history, it is all too easy to forget that it was designed at least 3 years before the appearance of the first 8-bit microprocessor. The notion of packet communications was still nearly 10 years into the future. The team wanted to demonstrate that they could store data at will on a spacecraft in transit across the sky and then download it at another location. They wanted to demonstrate non-real-time digital communications to themselves and to the world. Jan King, W3GEY, AMSAT Oscar 7 project manager, explains, thinking in retrospect, that experiment wasn't the best it could have been. However, it was simple, and it proved our resolve. The entry in 1972 on AO6, and then again in 1974 on board AO7, was a demonstration experiment we called CodeStore, and it led to far more ambitious packetized store and forward data satellites in our future. It probably wasn't the best choice at the time, but we chose the command frequency for the uplink. This meant we didn't have to implement yet another receiver. However, this made the experiment far less accessible to hams than it could have. AMSAT did not want to share the knowledge of the command frequency and codes with anyone who didn't have a need to know them. Thus, CodeStore was not an experiment that was shared with everyone, as were the communications transponders. It could realistically only be used by authorized command stations. We had hoped for a universal store and forward demonstration, but what was in fact created was a broadcast tool, and in that regard, CodeStore was very successful. CodeStore was the brainchild of and was designed and fabricated by John Good, W5CAY. In one small module, he housed an AFSK decoding system, which allowed uplink data to be clocked into a long shift register containing 896 bits. This was done with the memory ICs of the day. What one could manage then was 14 ICs, each containing 64 bits of serial data storage. The contents of the shift register was sequentially downlinked, first in, first out, to the selected beacon when CodeStore was commanded to the run mode. This number of bits is divisible by 8, so one might have expected a downlink message of 112 8-bit words. No, this was 1974, so Morse code messages were downlinked. The idea was that more individuals can copy a broadcast message if they don't need specialized decoding equipment. King adds, no one can deny that we could have made a better go of it if the notion of a remote terminal digital communications goal had remained pure. It did not. Ultimately, its highest value was discovered to be to store the spacecraft's NORAD TLEs, as well as any critical AO7 operating schedule modifications, which might be of importance to the users. CodeStore was already available for use on AO6, so users were already expecting this feature, which appeared regularly on the beacons. While CodeStore was used on both AO6 and AO7 to demonstrate non-real-time communications via satellite, it was never used by independent, remotely located stations to demonstrate two-way communications in that way. The memory facilities required on board and the lack of any firmware that even approached the capabilities of a file handling system did not exist in 1972. That would have to wait for another day when, once again, 4 AMSAT spacecraft in a small constellation would demonstrate a proper store and forward packet handling system. That was to occur in 1990. CodeStore went into service as a broadcast device allowing users to receive in Morse code the latest, then NORAD TLEs. CodeStore was a complete success. It saved command stations a tremendous amount of work, avoiding the need for a global network of operators who would otherwise be needed to relay the same data.
The FCC has intensified its focus on the 5.9 GHz band, where new rules are being finalized for the use of cellular delivery of communications to and from cars and trucks on the road. The Intelligent Transportation System, or ITS, scored a big gain in late November as the FCC voted on a proposal enabling the use of cellular vehicles to everything, or CV2X, on the 5.9 GHz band. This would establish new rules for the ITS within 30 MHz of that spectrum. The system is already in use by many automakers, sending and receiving messages over existing 5G cellular networks with alerts about traffic issues, weather conditions, road hazards, or speeding cars. The FCC measure also sets out the technical parameters for the use of CV2X, including power and emission limits. The system permits vehicles to communicate with roadside infrastructure and the cell phones of pedestrians, cyclists, and road workers, enabling safety communications even when there are no line-of-sight warnings. The FCC said in a press release that the new spectrum rules would accelerate the automotive industry and state and federal government plans for transitioning from dated technology to the more advanced CV2X automobile safety technology.
One of Europe's few remaining shortwave broadcasters is not going QRT quietly. Austria's ORS shortwave radio station in Mugeron is poised to go off the air on December 31st, as we reported back in October. But before it does, it will have its final 100,000-watt marathon on 1060 kilohertz on December 26th. The marathon on the AM station will begin at radio DARC programming at 0900 UTC and will continue through the other programs until Radio Power Mobile concludes at 1459 UTC. Meanwhile, Radio DARC has announced that starting Sunday, January 5, its broadcasts will continue to be carried on shortwave thanks to an agreement signed with the station in the BBC broadcast complex in Wolverton, England. Listeners across Europe and the Middle East will be able to hear the programming on 9670 kilohertz. The high-gain antenna system at the complex is expected to give 125 kilowatt transmission and effective radiated power of nearly 4 megawatts. Meanwhile, the radio amateur owned and run Channel 292, a 10,000-watt transmitter near Ingolstadt in Germany, will continue to use the 6040 kilohertz frequency for more local reception of Radio DARC's programs. The ORS station was formerly Radio Austria International broadcast station and is well known for having had Europe's largest directional antenna system for shortwave broadcasts.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
Hello and welcome to the DX Corner for your weekly dose of DX. I'm Bill, AJ8B. You know, one of the interesting things about this hobby is that from week to week and month to month, you meet interesting people and you make new friends all the time. Over the past year or so, I've come to know Ralph, K9ZO. Ralph was a guest on 3 DX Mentor podcast YouTube episodes with 2 more planned. Ralph, Joe, WAGEX, and I became weekly email pals exchanging ideas about new podcast episodes, his contesting on a budget series, and a variety of other topics. Although I've never met Ralph in person, his warmth, kindness, and fellowship were always present, even through Zoom sessions. Well, unfortunately, earlier this week, Joe, WAGEX, informed me of his passing. The DX community, the Ham Fellowship, and the general population have lost a truly good guy. I thought I would pass along the message that is on his QRZ.com page. Rest in peace, my friend. Quote, "It is with deep sadness that I must report K9ZO as a silent key. Ralph Bellis bravely fought a long battle with cancer. Even in his last days, Ralph continued to be a great DX mentor, offering advice and encouragement to his fellow DXers and contesters. His call, K9ZO, will echo in the pile-ups and contests for eternity. Thanks for being such a great friend, Ralph. 7-3 for now." And that was written by Gary, KC9EE. And our thoughts and prayers are with the family. So here's what's happening in the world of DX. This section of DX News comes from Bernie, W3UR, editor of the Daily DX, the Weekly DX, and the How's DX column in QST. If you would like a free 2-week trial of the Daily DX, your only source of real-time DX information, just drop me a note at thedxmentor@gmail.com. The 9 Lima 5 Alpha group, who's activating Sierra Leone, says there are many complaints about their log. They note that they regularly update it manually by overwriting what comes in from live streaming. Some QSOs do not appear live, but will be there after the next normal update, quote, which is now daily. They say, quote, "There is no need to send a multitude of messages that we don't have time to process while we're on a DXpedition anyway," end quote. They are making 10,000 QSOs per day with an almost perfect balance between CW, sideband, and FT8. The pileups are very large. They say if they weren't so dedicated to being on the air, they could be enjoying the beach and the 31-degree water temperatures. And I have to say, I've worked them in 3 different modes on 3 different bands, so I know they're spread out and they're doing a great job. ZA/NS5K, Ron Lewis, thinks several stations will be on the air Christmas Eve, December 24th, from Albania, looking for as many stations in the USA as possible, particularly starting around 0200 Zulu. Look for them on or near 14.200 and 7.200 MHz. Ron will be using his ZA/NS5K call sign, and he says 2 high school students are also approved to use that call while working North America. Chris, VK2YUS, updates us on his next Vanuatu activity. From Port Villa, he will have YJ0CA on the air approximately December 10th through the 16th, including the ARRL 10-meter contest, single operator on sideband. All of his activity will be single sideband only with an IC7300, a 400-watt amp, and a simple wire antenna in vertical for 40 through 10 meters. To avoid local nighttime noise levels, he will mostly operate between 2100 and 1000 Zulu. Chris logs on paper and uses paper QSL cards for confirmations, not using the online log and confirmation systems available. He will send out cards in January from Australia. His QSL info is on QRZ.com, and that was VK2YUS. KH7AL/KH9 Allen recently started a new job on Wake Island as an electronic technician and has Mondays off local time, which is GMT -12, but it is a day ahead of the U.S. He will most likely be on the air early mornings or late afternoons local time to avoid the peak heat of the day. His assignment is 3 months on, 1 month off, work rotation, and the job opportunity was a big change for he and his family, but he's committed to at least a year and he will see how it goes. The KH7AL/KH9 station is a Yaesu FT891, and he has dipoles for 40, 30, 20, 17, 15, and 10. He does not have any digital capability at present. For CW, he says, quote, "I'm not sure my CW skills are up for running the kind of pileup I met yesterday. Yet." His first day on the air, he got 115 QSOs on 20 in 80 minutes before he QRT'd, mostly Japan, but he also got China, New Caledonia, Australia, Uruguay, Brazil, Bulgaria, Greece, Finland, Argentina, Thailand, Norway, Estonia, Spain, and Russia. And he notes that his Brazilian contacts were more than 10,000 miles away. Alan notes that his mentor, NL7RR, will likely be visiting again in February, and most likely they will both get on the air. Also, 2 others he works with are interested in getting ham licenses. He figures maybe they'll get a club going. So we have an immediate press release for Rotuma Island, 3 Delta 2 Yankee. Our time here on Rotuma Island has come to an end, and what an adventure it has been. This morning the team got to work early taking down the antennas, cleaning equipment, and packing it away before the heat of the sun was just too intense to work. Life here is simple, and there aren't many resources available on the island, so this trip has been one of overcoming adversity and working together as a team. We have been through 5 power generators, numerous station fixes, rewires. We've even had to pack the entire station away to survive the rain and wind. The final QSO count for our operation will sit between 30 and 32,000 QSOs, opposed to the 40,000 club log shows, which contains a number of dupes. We will upload the final, quote, golden log once we have departed here. QSL is via Charles M0OXO. If there are any not in log queries, please use the not in log function on the OQRS page and don't email Charles directly. Despite all on-island operators holding valid Rotuma licenses, we are still working with TAF Fiji for the allocation of the remote operator licenses. TAF is happy with this arrangement, assuring us that we will not be breaching licensing during our operation. Due to the high number of remote operators on our team, there is a delay in processing these licenses. On Tuesday morning, we will complete our packing process, ready to fly out of Rotuma on Wednesday morning. We will then start to make our way back to our homes after 4 weeks of traveling. We would like to thank our sponsors for making this project come to life, and thank you in the DX community for the QSOs made during our time on Rotuma. So here's an update on FW7AA, who's on Wallis and Futuna Islands. They are now QRT. We made 15,000 plus contacts, which is an average rate of 1,000 QSOs per day. It's like field day that goes on for 2 weeks. Thanks to everyone in the pileups. OQRS will be enabled when we get home next week. Bob and I are currently in Nadi, Fiji at the Club Fiji Resort. We arrived well after dark and will set up our 2 Elecraft K3 stations and our 2 DX commanders tomorrow morning, our time, which would have been yesterday. After some discussion, we've decided not to erect a 160-meter antenna. We would only get 2 nights usage from it, and it's too consuming to set up and tear down. Look for 3 Delta 2 November Bravo on the air, as we have an excellent location right on the water. 73 from Ralph, K7AR. So here's a contest update. I know that the aerial contest sheet is read elsewhere in this podcast, and the contests that I mention are sometimes redundant. However, there are a few contests that I have found to be especially useful for DXers who are trying to fill band slots or to get entities or zones in the log that may otherwise be difficult to get. The next one coming up of interest to me, and maybe interest to you, I hope, is the ARL 10-meter contest. The objective is for as many amateurs worldwide to exchange QSO information with as many stations as possible on the 10-meter band. The contest will be held the second full weekend of December. It starts at 0 UTC Saturday and runs through 23:59 UTC Sunday, which is December 14th to 15th. The exchange is as follows. All stations send a signal report. W/VE stations, including Alaska and Hawaii, send their state or province. Mexican stations send their state or province. DX stations reply with a serial number. I do remember years ago at the bottom of the Sunspot cycle, I pretty much spent the weekend working that home from school, and I think I worked 30 or 40 guys in the Cincinnati area, so I'm really looking forward to being able to spend some time in there and really see what propagation is going to deliver to me. So until next week, this is Bill, AJ8B, saying 7-3, and thanks to my ex-wife Karen for her love and support. I hope to see you in the pile-ups.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
Welcome to the 18th segment of Ham Radio History, a century of amateur radio. Ham's Organizations, Events, Inventions. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR. Our thanks go out to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for the use of his website in the presentation of these programs. Now, here is the next chapter of Ham Radio History. The Lid. As it seemed ever more likely that the U.S. might enter the war in Europe, radio amateurs speculated about their own role. Referring to it as the disturbance, a late 1916 QST editorial noted that the president had activated the National Guard and that Signal Corps units had been particularly prominent in the call-up. One Connecticut amateur, David Moore, 1ZZ, a member of his state's unit and one of the original governors of the ARRL, related his experience. The attitude of the government, particularly the Army, is that we amateurs are all right as far as we go, but the trouble is we are all located in the big cities where the machinery of civilization is fully developed and at hand. The telephone and the telegraph are at hand, and only in extraordinary emergencies could they see where we could be of use. This is surprisingly similar to views you hear today about the utility of amateur radio in the age of satellites, cell phones, and the Internet. He went on to say that if hams were able to situate stations in remote areas with no infrastructure, they'd be exactly what the government needed, a foreshadowing of field day and many emergency operations to come. The editor continued to describe portable sets and called upon amateurs to fill the extraordinary need for operators in the Signal Corps. At a junior encampment in Plattsburgh, New York, which later became the Army's Officer Candidate School, 3,500 servicemen from across the country were assembled that fall, including a number of radio amateurs. Though not explained, this seems to refer to a military preparatory or training event. One of them, L.S. Summers, Jr., 3AFE, was relaxing along a roadside, enjoying a rest period during a long training march. He absent-mindedly blew a CQ using a blade of grass between his thumbs and was immediately answered by 5 other members of the H Company, 14th Regiment, who were within earshot. They formed a group that same day and would frequently get together to discuss radio. The Army did not quite yet grasp the potential of the amateurs already embedded within its ranks, but soon would. In February 1917, as the United States officially broke off diplomatic relations with Germany, QST opened a Department of Defense conducted by Edgar Felix for discussing national security and defense-related activities for radio amateurs. QST columns were then and are still called departments. Relaying naturally took center stage. A national relay system could be set up with volunteers assigned to 15-minute blocks of time twice per month, where they would commit to be on the air to handle messages in time of war. Its effectiveness would depend primarily on the discipline of members in meeting their assigned on-air schedules. The idea was compared with how the French had recently used Boy Scouts to carry messages and help their nation in other ways after it mobilized. It was also compared to other events from history, the runners of ancient Greece, Paul Revere's Ride, and the Cannonade, as it was called, used to announce the completion of the Erie Canal in 1825. By firing a succession of cannon along the canal's length and down the Hudson River, the news of its opening was carried from Buffalo to New York in about 90 minutes, an audio frequency relay. Message relaying had always been all about spanning greater distances and the challenge of the game. But now the ARRL intended to demonstrate to the government that the relay system could also be used for public good in times of crisis. QST went so far as to assert, and correctly it turned out, that the outcome of trunk line tests would determine whether or not the League would be shut down in time of war. The final March editorial posed a big question on everyone's mind. If the country went to war, would amateurs be permitted to continue operating? The answer quickly became clear. The April editorial declared it a near certainty that if war came, amateurs would be off the air for transmitting and probably receiving too. Nevertheless, the League held out hope that certain stations that were deemed useful would be called upon to continue operating, but that would depend on the availability of operators and stations, their willingness to keep constant operations going, multi-operator at one station, and in any case would probably only be allowed to receive. For the rest of the amateurs, QST recommended making good use of the idle time by studying the radio art. ARRL and QST would not be closed up. The magazine could serve as the main vehicle for amateurs to keep in touch. This turned out to be wishful thinking. Despite the threatened shutdown, the ARRL was poised for expansion. Such was the momentum in amateur radio at the war's onset. By the 3-year anniversary of its founding, the League had grown beyond the capacity of a few people, mostly just Maxim and Tuska, to keep things running. On 28 February, 6 members of the League's leadership from Connecticut and New York met at the Engineers Club in New York City to work out restructuring the organization for the expected growth. Some had never before met in person. After getting used to looking at instead of listening to each other, they drew up a constitution, elected an initial set of directors and 6 division managers to supersede the trunkline managers. The elected officers were Hiram Percy Maxim, 1ZM, President, Arthur A. Hebert, 2ZH, Vice President and General Manager, Clarence D. Tuska, 1ZT, Secretary, C.R. Runyon, Jr., 2ZS, Treasurer. The rest of the Board of Direction consisted of J.O. Smith, 2LK, later 2ZL, R.H.G. Matthews, 9IK, John C. Cooper, Jr., Frank M. Corlett, 5BJ, later 5ZC, W.H. Smith, 9ZF, Howard C. Seaford, 6EA, Victor F. Camp, H.L. Stanley, W.T. Frazier, 8VX, W.T. Gravely, 3RO, T.E. Gady, 3WN, and Miller R. Hutchison, J. Smith, Atlantic, Cooper, East Gulf, Matthews, Central, Corlett, West Gulf, W. Smith, Rocky Mountain, and Seaford, Pacific, also were the respective division managers. For several of them, this was simply a change of title. They, in turn, would appoint district superintendents who would appoint assistants. The entire group, many in their 20s, would then comprise the operating department of the ARRL, with General Manager A.A. Hebert 2ZH, in charge of the League affairs. Headquarters would be in New York City, with a mailing address at 50 Church Street, his business address. A picture of the Board of Direction meeting appeared in May QST along with the new Constitution in its entirety and a map of the divisions. The Constitution stated that the organization's objective, Section 1, Paragraph 2, shall be the promotion of interest in radio communication in such subjects as are allied thereto, and in the relaying of messages without charge. Membership, Section 2, Paragraph 1, would be open to anyone interested or engaged in radiotelegraphy or telephony, perhaps also implying that one could be engaged but uninterested, and that was just fine too. Together, the President, Vice President, General Manager, Secretary, Treasurer, and Division Directors constituted the Board of Direction, which would be the League's primary governing body, with the President as its chairman. Amendments to the Constitution could be adopted by a two-thirds vote of the Board, except for changing the headquarters location, which would require a four-fifths vote. A life membership was offered for $25. Regular dues were $2. A quick break for identification purposes. You're listening to This Week in Amateur Radio. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR. Normally, such a major restructuring would have received top billing in QST, but on the May's issue cover, a red banner declared it to be the war number. A full-page announcement opposite the table of contents began, "War measure," and "We are at war. Amateur wireless is at a standstill. Our stations are closed." Although the circulation was continuing to increase, the number of pages would be decreased to make up for the loss of advertising revenue. An order from the Department of Commerce Navigation Service Office of Radio Inspector addressed to all radio experimenters was mailed to all licensed amateurs and reprinted in QST. It ordered the immediate cessation of all operation, both transmitting and receiving as feared, but went even further to require the disabling of all equipment and lowering and disconnection of all antennas. An enclosed blank to be used to indicate compliance was demanded from radio amateurs under threat of rigid investigation. The order was signed by the District Communications Superintendent and unidentified Navy lieutenant. The QST editor lamented, "Every amateur station is closed down. The lid is on and clamped tightly for a period of time, the duration of which no man knows. All amateur traffic is halted where it happened to stand. All plans for improvements are canceled. All the plans of our manufacturers are in midair. In short, the great amateur wireless advance in these United States is stopped." At the same time, however, the military had an acute and immediate need for radio operators and no time to train new ones. There was no question about what the estimated 6,000 amateurs should be doing after being put off the air. Nearly 4,000 eventually served, contributing to the Navy's staff of radiomen, which grew from just under 1,000 to nearly 7,000 by the war's end. The ARRL Board of Direction responded by passing a resolution to offer the full support of the organization and its more than 3,000 members to the U.S. government. It would provide operators and equipment and, holding out hope for some way to operate, was prepared to undertake the organization and direction of a systematic plan to eliminate the operation of secret illegal wireless plants, which will be used to supply the enemy with traitorous information. The lead editorial that month was a call for enlistment into Navy and Army radio operations. For weeks, the Navy had been appealing for radio operators to enlist or join the reserve. Maxim and General Manager Hebert were asked by the authorities to help recruit amateurs to man and equip Coastal Patrol stations as receiver operators. This editorial was the result. They were acknowledged by the Director of Naval Communication in the next issue. Amateurs could enroll in this service, working 6 hours per day for the duration of what was now being referred to as the German War. They would get a $60 uniform allowance, at least $30 pay per month depending on ability, and $1.50 for subsistence until quarters could be provided. This amounts to roughly $1,100, $550, and $27 respectively in 2013 currency. The anticipated demand for radio equipment was so great that the Navy asked the League whether its members would provide it with equipment for fair value. The matter would be left up to the individual members. Accordingly, the war was expected to quickly prompt a significant expansion of radio-related manufacturing. With many amateurs selling their gear to the military, there would also be a huge demand later, and amateurs anticipated a tremendous improvement in their stations when the war eventually ended, perhaps a silver lining in the pervasive storm clouds of spring 1917. As summer, the perennial period of increasing static and decreasing on-air activity even without the ban, approached, the editor noted that the volume of message traffic had nevertheless grown tremendously and had been extending later into the season. In fact, before the shutdown, this was the first time that March had ever been the heaviest traffic month. He then turned philosophical. Every once in a while, one of you fellows writes in a letter and tells us about the feeling of intimate acquaintance and friendship which he feels toward everybody concerned in the ARRL. It always warms the cockles of our heart and inspires us. Just why we wireless bugs seem to possess this brotherly feeling to a greater extent than other groups of people is not entirely plain. Sometimes we think it is because of the deeper and more abstruse problems which we have to face. We who are closely identified in the study of radio communication are brought very close to the wonders of nature. The great laws which govern all things and which we must always observe gives one a very much deeper regard for truth that comes to those who follow only the ordinary matters of life. The fact that we are troubled with the same things arouses a feeling of brotherhood. The fact that we appreciate one another's failures and successes bring us close together. The romance of sitting alone in a little out-of-the-way room among a lot of instruments and yet be in communication with congenial spirits in other distant and out-of-the-way little rooms is conducive to profound and reverent thoughts. The fun which bubbles over from so many of us and finds expression in QST is one of the interesting manifestations of the effect of our work upon us. He expressed a hope that amateurs would be returning soon, and that this same feeling would remain even when the number of hams grew tenfold in the future. Included in this material are quotes from the following: Uncle Sam's Wireless, editorial QST, August 1916, page 213. L.F. Summers, Plattsburgh Amateurs, editorial QST, October 1916, page 302. Department of Defense, QST, February 1917, page 20. War, editorial, QST, March 1917, page 29. If We Are Closed Up, editorial, QST, April 1917, page 26. An enlarged ARRL, QST, May 1917, page 7. War, QST, May 1917, page 3. Clinton B. DeSoto, 200 Meters and Down, The American Radio Relay League, Incorporated, 1936, page 52. Our Country Calls Us, editorial QST, April 1917, page 25. Big Demand Coming, editorial QST, May 1917, page 13. The ARRL Spirit, editorial QST, May 1917, page 16. With great thanks to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for the use of his website's materials, Ham Radio History, A Century of Amateur Radio, Ham's Organizations, Events, Inventions, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, reporting for This Week in Amateur Radio.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. In the process of developing something from scratch, there are a great number of things that need doing. When you start, it's unclear what's the most important thing, but experience has told me that starting, anywhere, is the best way to get runs on the board. Here's a smattering of what I'm talking about. What do we call this thing? How will we license it? What does it do? How will we determine what is required and what is nice to have? How will we avoid reinventing the wheel? And how will we make sure that it's something that people want rather than yet another solution looking for a problem? I started by looking at what else is going on. Specifically, the software-defined radio or SDR world isn't something that arrived yesterday. There's lots of stuff around and plenty of it is open source, so we can look inside and learn. I asked around to see if there was a table that compares how the various SDR tools talk to the world, or rather, what protocol they use. Think about how you'd get the data from a radio to a computer, and how you'd control the radio and the data flow. Now imagine that neither are in the same room, or even in the same country. I started writing down what I think is needed, and then realized that this replicates stuff that has already been done. Tools like RTL SDR, SoPi, OpenHP SDR, and SPI Server already do some or all of this. There are others. Thus the request for the table. This resulted in no table, but plenty of questions, including a discussion about protocols versus drivers, which led me to the realization that I'm going to be doing a lot of yak shaving before this project has anything to show for itself. This neatly prompted the idea that by the time I was done, the yak was going to be well and truly shaved, and now the project has a name, Bold Yak. At some point it appears that there was a coffee shop in 2012 with that name, and there was an engineering student using it in 2004, so no major conflicts I can see, but feel free to point out any I missed. Bold Yak works as a name, 2 words, no hyphen, because it says nothing about what the project is about, which is what you do when you cannot think of a suitable relevant name, and you'd have to admit it rolls off the tongue better than Amateur Radio GNU Radio Project or ARGRP. Another consideration is how to license this thing, whatever it is. As you might know, I'm a firm believer, advocate, user and contributor to something called open source software. It essentially says that if you distribute the software, you are required to share the source code. Lofty goal, but the outcome is not particularly equitable. Bruce Perrine's Kilo 6 Bravo Papa is the creator of the open source definition, derived from the Debian Free Software Guidelines, where he was the primary author in 1997. In other words, Bruce has embodied these concepts for almost half my life. Bruce says this about open source today, quote, "Open source is the infrastructure of business, but the economic structure of open source is one of resource extraction, like logging or mining. Many businesses extract wealth from open source but do not return significant value to the developers." End quote. Bruce is in the process of developing something called Post-Open that attempts to address this inequity. Full disclaimer, I've been commenting on some of what Bruce is doing, and he has graciously accepted most of my suggestions. I'm not yet a convert, but I think that what Bruce is attempting is crucial for the future of sustainability of the open source community. Which brings me back to licensing. How do we license Bold Yak, and how do we strike a balance between eating food and allowing others to play with our toys? If you have suggestions, please let me know. For now, I'm storing my stuff locally, but fully plan to show and tell once I've figured out how. So, what is Bold Yak? Here's what I have so far. Quote, "The Bold Yak project aims to create a modular, bidirectional and distributed signal processing and control system that leverages GNU radio." End quote. I hasten to add that this is a work in progress. I'd like the definition to be small and specific. If it can be improved, please feel free to make your pitch.
My email address is cq@vk6flab.com. I'll also point out that this is slow, deliberately so. I want this to be fun, but I also want this to be real. I also need to manage my own life, family, health, finances, and humour. So be gentle. I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima, Alpha Bravo.
Japanese researchers launched the world's first wooden satellite, LignoSat, into space, marking an ambitious step towards exploring the viability of timber for lunar and Martian construction. This pioneering satellite, developed collaboratively by the Kyoto University and Sumitomo Forestry, was sent to the International Space Station aboard a SpaceX mission from NASA's Kennedy Space Center on November 4 of 2024. Once at the ISS, LignoSat will be released into orbit approximately 400 kilometers, or 250 miles above the Earth. LignoSat, a 1U-sized CubeSat, carries an amateur radio mission that will extract call signs from the FM packet data signals uplinked and respond to them by using the CW downlink with their call signs. An educational mission to educate students to learn about the characteristics of the satellite by acquiring its housekeeping data, such as the internal temperature, the strain of the wooden structure, and the Earth's magnetic field, and calculating the rotational direction and rate of the satellite, as well as observing the effect of the space environment on the wooden structure. The satellite, which name is derived from the Latin word for wood, is a compact palm-sized structure. LignoSat's mission is to demonstrate the potential of wood as a sustainable and durable material for space exploration. Takayo Doi, a former astronaut and current researcher at Kyoto University, expressed that using timber could pave the way for constructing habitats that support human life and work in space indefinitely. With timber, a material we can produce by ourselves, we'll be able to build houses, live and work in space forever, he said. Doy's team is working under a 50-year vision of building timber structures on the Moon and Mars, planting the seeds for future space-based infrastructure. The researchers opted for honoki, a type of magnolia tree native to Japan, traditionally used for sword sheaths, after conducting a 10-month experiment on the ISS. Honoki proved its resilience, leading to its selection as the core material for LignoSat. The satellite was constructed using a traditional Japanese craft technique without screws or glue, showcasing innovation steeped in heritage. One of LignoSat's key roles in its 6-month orbit will be to measure the endurance of wood against extreme space temperatures, which oscillate between minus 100 to 100 degrees Celsius every 45 minutes as the satellite shifts from sunlight to darkness. The onboard sensors will also monitor how well wood mitigates in space's radiation's impact on semiconductors, information that could be pivotal for designing data centers and other space-based structure. Kenji Kariaya of the Sumitomo Forestry emphasized the cutting-edge nature of this research, noting that despite appearing old-fashioned, wood could be integral to future space technology. A downlink on 435.820 MHz has been coordinated for CW, 4x8 GMSK, AX25 telemetry, and FM.
Ham radio clubs and others seeking grants from Amateur Radio Digital Communications will be able to turn to someone new on staff there to assist them in processing their paperwork. Adam Zimmel, W0ZML, has joined the Amateur Radio Digital Communications as its Grants Administrative Associate. The ARDC made the announcement on its website saying that Adam will work to help them handle the grant process and also provide support for some of the other internal operations at the ARDC. He has been on board since late October. Adam has a strong background in cybersecurity and IT policy. Amateur Radio Digital Communications awards grants to qualifying applicants whose projects fit into one of 3 main categories: research and development, education, and the support and development of amateur radio.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available as an on-demand stream from Spotify, Deezer, and wherever podcasts are available.
Bruce Page, KK5DO, is here now with this week's AMSAT report. Bruce?
Thanks, John. I hope that over the past few weeks, the segments on AO7 were useful and entertaining. Some of the listeners were not born when AO7 was launched, and some were kids, teens, or adults. Wherever you fit in, it was an interesting time for amateur radio in space. This week we learned of a new satellite developed and built by Kyoto University and Sumitomo Forestry in Japan. It is LignoSat. Ligno is the Latin word for wood. Why this name? The satellite is built of wood. In fact, it is the world's first wooden satellite. It will test timber in space. The satellite is expected to last 6 months in orbit. The satellite will measure the endurance of wood against space temperatures, which go from minus 100 to 100 degrees. When the satellite re-enters, instead of producing aluminum oxide particles, it will cleanly disintegrate. The main goal is to eventually be able to build wood structures in space. As far as hams, the satellite has an FM packet uplink. It will then pull your call sign out of the packet and respond on the downlink with your call sign in CW. Students can grab housekeeping data and analyze it. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO. Back to you, John.
And thanks, Bruce, for that report.
It is time once again for the Propagation Forecast Report, brought to us by solar prognosticator Tad Cook, K7RA in Seattle, Washington. Solar activity seems to have dropped dramatically from a recent peak. Are we over the cycle peak and headed down again? It is too early to say. Daily average sunspot numbers this week sank to 120.1. Looking at predicted solar flux for the near term, it will be 175 on December 7th and 8th, 170 on December 9th and 10th, 175 on December 11th and 12th, 205 on December 13th through the 17th. Looking at the predicted planetary A index for the near term, it will be 8 on December 7th, 5 on December 8th through the 12th, 10 and 5 on December 13th through the 15th, and hold steady at 8 on December 16th through the 18th.
In radio sport this week, more great contest on December 6th through the 8th, the ARRL 160-meter contest, that's CW. December 7th and 8th, the Cowbar contest, that's phone. December 7th, the Wake Up QRP Sprint, CW. December 7th and 8th, it's the Pro CW contest, that's CW. And on December 7th and 8th, it's the INORC contest, that is CW as well. And remember, you can visit the ARRL contest calendar for more events and information. Upcoming section, state, and division conventions, December 13th through the 14th, the Tampa Bay Ham Fest, sponsoring the ARRL West Central Florida Section Convention. That's in Plant City, Florida. January 4th, the Ham Radio University, sponsoring the ARRL New York City Long Island Section Convention. That's in Brookville, New York. And January 10th through the 11th, the 2025 Southwest Florida Regional Ham Fest, sponsoring the ARRL Southern Florida Section Convention. That's in Fort Myers, Florida.
Amateur radio operators ages 25 and younger will be on the air as special event stations around the world throughout December in celebration of Youth on the Air Month in amateur radio. Youth on the Air Month stations will be on all bands and modes at various times. QSL and award information is at events.ham-yoda.com. Last year, young hams worldwide surpassed their goal of 100,000 QSOs in the month of December with a final tally of 103,788. More information about Youth on the Air Month, specifically in the Americas, can be found at youthontheair.org, including a link to all Yoda station spots on dxsummit.com. Overlapping with Yoda Month is Round 3 of the Yoda Contest, which is on December 30th, 2024, from 1000 to 2159 UTC.
On December 17, 1903, after years of tinkering in their Dayton, Ohio bicycle shop, Orville and Wilbur Wright made their first 3 flights in their new flying machine. The Bellbrook Amateur Radio Club in Dayton will commemorate 121 years of the Wright brothers' first flights with special event station W8W on December 17, 2024, from 1400 to 2100 UTC. Operation will be on 7.217, 14.317, and 21.317 MHz on all modes. Any certificate is available by mail at rightflight@bellbrookarc.org.
The 25th Annual Skywarn Recognition Day, or SRD, is Saturday, December 7th. With all the details on Skywarn Recognition Day, we go to League Headquarters, where John Ross, KB8IDJ, files this report.
SRD recognizes the work of amateur and non-ham Skywarn storm spotters in keeping their communities safe during severe weather. Trained spotters provide observations of ground truth to regional National Weather Service NWS offices. While meteorologists have advanced remote sensing data like radar, satellite, and weather instrument networks available to them, the technology isn't granular enough to replace trained human observation. Via amateur radio repeaters, smartphone apps, phone calls, GMRS radios, and other means, Skywarn spotters make sure the NWS has the information needed to make good warning and advisory decisions. Weather spotters provide extremely valuable information to both NWS and local emergency management officials, said ARL Director of Emergency Management Josh Johnson, KE5MHV. Johnston served as an emergency management director in Arkansas for 17 years before coming to lead ARRL's Amateur Radio Emergency Service, ARES program. The ground truth that spotters provide is vital during storms for responder safety, as well as alerting the citizens of the community. In 1999, ARRL and NWS came together to recognize the importance of these spotters to the warning process, creating Skywarn Recognition Day. An SRD features an on-the-air operating event in which ham radio operators activate many of the NWS office stations, and other radio amateurs try to work as many of them as possible. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
ARRL will be on the air from ARRL headquarters in Newington, Connecticut as WX1AW during portions of the event. QSL cards and certificates of participation will be available.
The annual Lighthouse Christmas Lights operating event begins Saturday, December 21st, 2024 at 0001 UTC and runs through 2359 UTC, January 1st, 2025. Sponsored by the Amateur Radio Lighthouse Society, the event promotes public awareness of amateur radio and lighthouses and contributes to the recognition of lighthouses, lightships, and their keepers. Licensed amateurs may use any and all bands, including WARC bands, and all modes that convey sufficient exchange details, including single sideband, CW, RTTY, PSK, FM, and slow scan TV. A list of suggested single sideband frequencies and CW center frequencies can be found at the club's website.
It is time once again for AMSAT satellite shorts from all over. And our only story this week finds us with NASA as they confirm that one of its greatest ever missions, Voyager 1, is back in business, with communications restored following an incident in October that had led to the veteran spacefarer losing its voice. When engineers commanded Voyager 1 to switch on one of its heaters to give the instruments a gentle thermal massage, a safety feature was tripped because of low power levels. It automatically switched off non-essential systems. The fault protection system took it upon itself to switch off the main X-band transmitter and activate the lower-powered S-band transmitter instead. Because of the great distance between Voyager 1 and Earth, however, transmissions on the S-band antenna could not be heard by NASA's Deep Space Network, meaning Voyager 1 had effectively fallen silent. NASA engineers were able to resolve the problem in early November, and X-band communications resumed on November 18th, with the spacecraft once again returning data from its 4 remaining instruments.
Now, in our 25th year of service to the worldwide amateur radio community, you are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio.
Applications are now being accepted for campers interested in attending the 2025 Youth on the Air Camp. With all the details you need to know, we go to John Ross, KD8IDJ, with this report.
Licensed amateur radio operators ages 15 through 25 who want to attend are encouraged to apply online at youthontheair.org. The camp is scheduled to take place June 15th through the 20th, 25 in Thornton, that's near Denver, Colorado. And the Denver Radio Club, an ARR-affiliated club, is the local host. The current application period is for the 5th camp for young amateur radio operators in North, Central, and South America. For the best chance at being selected, applicants should be submitted by 2359 Zulu on January 15th, 2025. Campers will be selected by the working group and notified by February 1st. And to encourage attendance from across the Americas, allocations for campers are being held open for various reasons and various areas of North, Central, and South America. If countries do not use their allocation or someone should within an allocation decline the acceptance, those positions will be filled from the remaining pool of applicants. There will be an ongoing process, and everyone will not receive notification of acceptance at the same time. Preference, though, will be given to first-time attendees. Applications will continue to be accepted through May 1st, and up to 50 campers may be accepted. I'm John Ross, KD8I-DJ.
The application process is free, but a $100 deposit is required upon acceptance. Should a potential camper be unable to pay the $100, they may apply for a scholarship or a waiver. Campers are also responsible for their own arrival and departure transportation to the camp. Travel assistance may be available, especially for those traveling from outside the U.S. and Canada. Travel during camp events is provided. For further details about the camp, visit the camp webpage at youthontheair.org or email Camp Director Neil Rapp, WB9VPG, at director@youthontheair.org.
The first college in India to add amateur radio studies to its undergraduate curriculum hosted a seminar geared towards young ham radio operators on December 1st and administered a test to students seeking the required operating certificate. It was a final exam of sorts for 75 of the undergrads at the Ramakrishna Mission Vivekananda Centenary College. The date of the program was significant. It marks the 166th birth anniversary of the pioneering scientist Jagadish Chandra Bose. The ham radio coursework began in July, conducted by hams of the Indian Academy of Communication and Disaster Management and the West Bengal Radio Club. Now all that's left for the students is to await their test results to learn whether they qualify for the Amateur Station Operator Certificate from India's Ministry of Telecommunications, allowing them to set up stations at home. A few days earlier, on a college campus in Kolkata, 156 students at the Women's Christian College received another kind of lesson in amateur radio. The same two organizations offered an overview of radio's essential role in disaster mitigation during a one-day workshop. The college principal said she expected to introduce amateur radio formally into coursework at the school soon.
The 83rd anniversary of the Civil Air Patrol will be commemorated with special event station W9CAP beginning Saturday, November 30th at 1200 UTC through Sunday, December 1st at 2359 UTC. The Illinois Wing Civil Air Patrol Amateur Radio Club is coordinating this special event for an opportunity to contact and thank Civil Air Patrol members for their volunteer missions. The planned frequencies are 28.450 MHz USB, 18.125 MHz USB, 14.250 MHz USB, and 7.225 MHz LSB. For more information and instructions on how to obtain a QSL card, contact the club at its website.
The Manchester Road Race isn't just an established fundraising tradition in Connecticut, it's now a family affair for Jack Robinson, KA1, GCZ, and his 10-year-old grandson, Aidan Karp, KC1, TWN. Both of them are members of the Bears of Manchester. The club's acronym stands for Better Emergency Amateur Radio Service and has the club call W1BRS. On Thanksgiving Day, the two amateurs helped their fellow club members relay information about the whereabouts and the well-being of the 12,000 participants running along the 4.7-mile course. They also kept a watchful eye on the more than 30,000 spectators. This kind of public service radio became a regular family affair after Aiden got his license last December, joining his 3 cousins as well as his aunt and uncle as hams. Jack said Aiden, who is an active member of Bears, also enjoys fox hunting activities that the club hosts and keeping a watchful eye on the weather as a skywarn spotter. Aiden is the youngest amateur to have ever provided this kind of support for the road race, but because the 6th grader has inspired other kids, that might just change soon. Jack said that ever since Aiden was seen in the spotlight with his radio, lots of area youngsters are willing to sign up to study for their license.
Satellites are playing a greater role throughout the world, from communicating directly with mobile phones to providing a network that enables disaster response at different levels. On December 1st, a presentation hosted by the Radio Society of Sri Lanka outlined the revolutionary changes that have been happening in countries throughout the world and the roles that low Earth orbit satellites are playing. The guest speaker was Kusal Opa, 4S7KE/VK2KSL, a senior wireless architect based in New South Wales, Australia. The 90-minute session, which was called The Future of Connectivity, was live-streamed and is available for viewing on YouTube.
A mentally disturbed woman, now in her 50s and currently lodged in West Bengal's Minipur Central Correctional Home, will finally get to meet her family after 8 years, thanks to the efforts of amateur radio enthusiasts. Members of the West Bengal Radio Club on Tuesday managed to locate the woman's family in Jharkhand's Pamalu district. After completing official procedures, she'll soon be handed over to her family. It all started in 2017 when police arrested the woman for illegally entering a prohibited area. She was later granted bail by a court, but trouble brewed when no one came to take her home. She could not explain properly where she was from, and there was no response from the address that was mentioned by the police during her arrest. She remained in the correctional facility as no legal authority could be found to take responsibility. On November 6th of this year, Aniruddha Ghosh, the Correctional Home's welfare officer, contacted the Amateur Radio Club for help. After learning that the woman was actually from the Palamu district, Ghosh contacted the radio club after Sahid Farvez, the secretary of the District Legal Services Authority, spoke to the woman herself. After listening to her dialect, he suggested she might be from Jharkhand rather than Uttar Pradesh. Once he raised the doubt about her place of origin, the radio club was contacted and they swung into action. After almost a month of searching, the woman's family was finally traced to the area. Her husband, Lajid Chowdhury, had filed a missing persons report with the local police, saying his wife had gone missing. Her husband told authorities she was not very stable mentally, but they never imagined she'd leave the house and go missing. The mistake happened when police registered the case. They mentioned she was from another area of the country and was granted bail in 2018, but she had to remain there all these years because authorities were trying to contact her family in the wrong town when she was actually from another town. I'm happy that we could locate her family, Barbez added.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, available as a direct download on our website at www.twiar.net.
The Satellite Frequency Coordination Committee of the International Amateur Radio Union has updated information regarding the approved frequency requests from the National Formosa University for Satellite Paris T1A. The satellite is tentatively scheduled for launch this coming January. Paris T1A, a 3U CubeSat, will provide essential services to the global amateur radio community with its primary mission, an FM voice crossband repeater to facilitate real-time voice communication between amateur radio operators on 145.980 MHz with an uplink tone of 67 Hz and 435.250 MHz downlink. The satellite will also carry an APRS digipeater to enable the transmission of real-time position and status information from APRS-equipped devices on 145.825 MHz. A telemetry beacon downlink on 437.850 MHz has also been coordinated, with unencrypted telemetry packets accessible to the public through online dashboards like SatNogs, promoting transparency and community collaboration.
At first glance, there is something about Morse code and the space age that don't go together. But think about Morse in its simple beauty. In addition to building a few spacecraft and pursuing a global amateur radio allocation for satellites at the International Telecommunications Union World Radio Conference, AMSAT was also busy developing an educational curriculum. Before STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics was even a concept, AMSAT thought it would be quite exciting to allow grade school to high school students the opportunity to understand the basics of a spacecraft, not by reading about it in a book, rather by using a real spacecraft in class. One of AMSAT's members, Dr. Martin Davidoff, K2 UBC, decided to write a curriculum at the secondary education level and received a grant from the Department of Energy to write it. The Satellite Experimenter's Handbook was distributed by the American Radio Relay League and AMSAT to anyone who might want to teach others about spacecraft technology. The book especially targeted secondary school educators. Key among the concepts was the idea of giving a teacher, who may or may not be a radio amateur, the information necessary to assemble a receiving system which could act as a student demonstration tool in school. The receiver and antenna would allow the class to receive and decode telemetry. This process required the students to think through some orbital mechanics, the technology of antennas and receivers, and finally the principles of demodulation and decoding. This is where the Morse came in. For just the numbers 0 to 9 in Morse can be learned in 10 minutes by just about anyone, and so it is a perfect tool for any 8th grader. The Morse code telemetry encoder system was designed and fabricated by John Good, W5CAY. This unit was built in one of the small modules that comprised the A07 space frame. This little box used fixed logic consisting of 34 ICs and 1 op-amp for the AD converter. Using CMOS components was amazingly efficient. It required 2 mA of current at 10 volts DC from the power bus, a whopping 20 milliwatts. This TLM encoder had 24 analog input channels that were organized into 4 columns and 6 rows. They were divided basically into current, voltage, and temperature channels. All were scaled to a 1.0 volt full-scale input to the AD converter. The encoder produced decimal values and was organized into 2 Morse characters between 0 and 99. The first number of each word is a digit giving the row number of the datum. This reduces the ambiguity of where in the frame the encoder was, in case the student got lost a bit. AMSAT's commitment to STEM education continues today with its CubeSat simulator program and its developing youth initiative, all fueled by a 50-year-old satellite that is still in operation today. Persons wanting to read more about the life and history of AMSAT Oscar 7 are invited to visit www.amsat.org.
The Battleship Iowa Amateur Radio Association and the Iowa's Innovation, Engineering, and Technology team will activate the ship's original NEPM Navy call sign on December 7th and 8th, 2024. John Ross, KD8 IDJ, has more.
Hours of operation both days are expected to be from 0700 Pacific Standard Time to 1700 Pacific Standard Time. The USS Iowa, by the way, is moored at the port of Los Angeles. This activation will be in memory of the 1941 attack on Pearl Harbor and all the radio amateurs and aficionados who answered the call, taking their skills into the military and civilian war efforts. ARRL requested and received from the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, a waiver to Section 97.111A to allow appropriately licensed amateur radio operators to work the NEPM for this limited event. Amateurs are reminded that they may not transmit on the military frequencies issued to NEPM. Amateur radios must operate within the privileges of their licenses, and licensees of other countries not under the FCC's jurisdiction are advised to refer to regulations imposed by their licensing agencies before calling NEPM. The operator will tell you where NEPM is listening to minimize causing interference to the station's in-band. And for an NEPM QSL and a complete list of frequencies and modes, go to the BIARA website. I'm John Ross, KD8I-DJ.
The transmit frequency and mode and the listening frequency and mode are 7.469 megahertz upper sideband transmit and 7.261 megahertz upper sideband for listening, 12.382 megahertz CW transmit and 14.061 megahertz CW listening, 14.667 megahertz USB transmit and 14.261 megahertz USB listening, a 19.16 megahertz RTTY transmits and 21.150 megahertz RTTY listening and 21.856 megahertz for upper sideband transmit and 21.361 megahertz USB listening. The listening frequencies are a starting point. The operator will tell you where NEPM is listening to minimize interference to stations in the band. For an NEPM QSL, please follow the instructions found on the club's website.
Soheya Bana, KO6 GTV, Richmond, California councilwoman and head of that city's Public Safety Committee, passed her amateur radio license test and is now a licensed technician class amateur radio operator. On Saturday, November 9th, 2024, the Brickyard Landing Homeowners Association, an HOA, hosted a one-day technician class license and VE test session. The HOA has an active amateur radio community emergency response team, CERT, presence and supports reasonable antenna requests to further that objective. They're also looking at creating a club station in their common area facility for their licensed members. Bana is working to bring VE test sessions to the city's community center so that more people can discover amateur radio and be better prepared to respond in the event of a citywide emergency. In addition to Bana, there were 18 newly licensed hands from Richmond, Berkeley, San Francisco, Oregon, and South Dakota who attended that VE session.
And our final story this week. If you believe in Santa Claus, and who doesn't, you probably believe that he lives only at the North Pole. Wrong. Santa has a summer home, and in Australia, you can find him in Wangaro, Western Australia, where he is in his shack excited to have finally got his Australian call sign. It's VK6SANTA, and he's making good use of it right now through to the 24th of December by hosting the VK6 Santa Amateur Radio Net. Santa is a very happy new Australian operator, and he is spreading holiday cheer. Visit his page on QRZ.com and you'll find that Santa is eager to work local hams as well as some DX. He's on 2 meters as well as 10, 20, and 40 meters. If all you want for Christmas is to get Santa in your Yuletide log, you might just get your wish.
Hi, I'm Terry Saunders, N1KIN, one of the anchors for This Week in Amateur Radio, and I have a few questions. Do you have a good radio voice? Do you have a quiet recording space, own a professional broadcast microphone and DAW software, and know how to use them? Can you commit to a same-day turnaround when given a script assignment? If you answered yes to all of these questions, and you're willing to volunteer your time to give a little something back to the ham radio hobby, then lend us your voice and join our anchor team for This Week in Amateur Radio. To learn more and see if you have what it takes, contact George Bowen, W2XBS, via email at w2xbs77@gmail.com or look him up on QRZ.com.
This Week in Amateur Radio is heard around the world on nets and great repeater systems like our newest affiliates, the K2IWR repeater on 147.180 MHz in Cortland, New York, and the K2 MST repeater on 443.150 MHz serving all of Syracuse, New York. We welcome them aboard the vast This Week in Amateur Radio network of repeaters and nets around the world. If your net or repeater carries This Week in Amateur Radio, why not let us know about it, and we'll give you a free promo here on the air. All you need to do is put all the details into an email and give us the repeater call sign, frequency, area served, and the days and times that you carry This Week in Amateur Radio, and send it off in an email to w2xbs77@gmail.com. We'd be happy to hear from you. That address, once again, is w2xbs77@gmail.com. We hope to hear from you real soon. Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the Rain Hamcast, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425DX News, Parks on the Air, and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you'd like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and our news team around the world, this is Chris Perrine, KB2FAF, wishing you a 73.